If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, well, aging.
So I came across a pretty cool article the other day on MedPage. Article was called American Seniors Eating Junkier Diets, and I thought it would be a really good subject for our podcast to dive into, especially based off of one of our last podcasts that we had with the importance of nutrition, a well-balanced diet, and quality of life. What do you think about diving into this?
That sounds good. That particular paper was based on a JAMA Network Open paper that was titled Trends in Diet Quality Among Older U.S. Adults from 2001 to 2018. And one thing that they concluded is based on the primary American Heart Association diet score, the proportion of older U.S. adults with poor diet quality significantly increased from about 51% to 61%. The portion of U.S. adults with intermediate diet quality significantly decreased from 48.6 to 38.7%, and the proportion with ideal diet quality remained consistently low across all years. The paper points out that some of the changes in diet quality are more noticeable among certain socio-demographic groups. For example, non-Hispanic white older adults had the biggest drop. Older adults with lower income levels and lower attainment of education consistently saw poorer scores.
So there's obviously a pattern there, and just kind of going off subject with the article, but still tying in with it. What do you think that pattern would be? It appears to me that it would just be primarily a source of income, that they're not being able to afford a proper, well-balanced diet, and they're having to resort to these more junkier meals. But you and I have talked in the past that that's kind of not the case. It is possible to have a really well-balanced, healthier diet that's on more of a financial budget.
Yeah, we did talk about that, and one of the things that the researchers highlighted that I don't think I necessarily agree with. They said that healthier diets cost more than unhealthy diets, and I think we'll dive into that a little bit more as you talked about. But it also talked about the driving force behind this whole diet quality drop-off is really complex and multifaceted. There's factors of the income of the individual. We talked about socio-demographic groups. There are cultural issues. There are issues of geographic area, food insecurities, food deserts, and those types of things. And there are other factors that contribute to that. I think some of it is at the education level, and I think probably education is probably one of the biggest factors contributing to this idea that we have in our heads that healthier diets cost more than unhealthy diets. I think when you have access to moderately healthy foods and you have the opportunity to prepare those foods, then food can definitely be much, much, much cheaper. I think what's happening is you have people who are living in poorer socio-demographic areas. They may be working multiple jobs in order to pay, exorbitant rents in those areas, or just to kind of get by, have other expenses. And as a result, they don't have quite the same amount of time to make food. And they don't have grocery stores that are convenient. And so they go and they buy, they're buying food at McDonald's or, other fast food restaurants, or buying processed foods that are quick and easy to make.
I think access to that grocery store does bring up a good point. I think living here in the Willamette Valley next to the Portland metro area, we're kind of privileged in the fact that, we have a lot of grocery stores that are around us. We're right next to a Winco, which is fairly cheap foods. They're affordable. There's other areas that have a lot more healthier options. But my girlfriend and I, we just went camping about 2 weeks ago down at the coast, and we were like, you know what, instead of packing the cooler to drive down, while we're down there, let's just stop by a grocery store. The only grocery store that was available was essentially like an off-brand version of Whole Foods. And even though we only got a small amount of food for just the weekend that we went camping, it ended up costing over $200 just for a couple items. I'm not even joking on this. Like a bell pepper by itself was $7, and I could not believe that. So if you do live in one of those areas where you're limited to a grocery store, there may be other options that are out there that could be affordable. I know that we're on today's podcast, we're going to talk about the possibility of online shopping and having your food delivered to you, and that may be an option as well. Let's dive back into this article, though. What else did the studies reveal regarding quality of life or any diseases that are tied in with eating a junkier diet?
Well, technically, I didn't talk about those things. There were the Trend study was basically just looking at the quality of the diet. It didn't tie in disease or any of those types of things. But certainly you can extrapolate that to, if we're not getting good quality food, there's going to be a higher incidence of many different types of disease. Poorer quality food may also lead to higher fat, higher sodium, higher sugar content, which can lead to diabetes and various heart conditions and things like that. But the studies didn't particularly talk about those. There was a study that was looking at the dietary patterns and quality of life in older adults. It was a systematic review. But it really found that there aren't enough good quality studies out there looking at the quality of life. But in most cases, all of the studies specifically involving subjects with chronic disease or at risk of chronic disease found higher quality of life scores with better diet quality. And so if we can improve the diet, we can improve the overall quality of life for the individuals. Now, you mentioned about where we live and having better access to grocery stores. I would say we really, as a society, have evolved away from that. Even living where I'm at in the Westland Tualatin area, for us to get to the grocery store, it is a good 2-mile walk or drive to the grocery store. So I wouldn't necessarily consider that accessible. If you have older adults who are no longer able to drive and are isolated, can they actually get to those stores to get the food? Or if they do walk, they're going to carry less food back because they can't carry as much. And so that's a big problem with diets in the elderly is as they get older, as their physical abilities decline, they're less likely to be buying as much because they can't carry as much, or when they're going to put it away in the homes, you're kind of limited because you lose reach or the ability to kind of lift heavier things. So buying in bulk is less of an option because you're frail and 95. Who's going to go out and buy a 50-pound bag of rice or something like that you can't even move? And so they do tend to buy in smaller quantities. The palate changes, and so there's a greater desire for tastier or savory foods. And so processed foods tend to taste a little bit better, and they have a little bit more difficulty in preparing their own foods. And so, they tend toward more sweets and other things like that as well, just based on some of the primary physiological changes that occur within the oral cavity.
Do you think it could have also been not just a lifestyle change, but kind of a cultural during the time frame? If you look at a lot of senior citizens that are out there, some of them they grew up during the Great Depression era. And I know, like, my grandparents, they always had sweets. There's always sweets that were always lying around the house. Hey, you want a Tootsie Roll? Do you think that has something to do with it? It's just you grew up a certain way, eating a certain type of food. Your body in return craves that type of food, combined with the lack of education, like you had mentioned earlier.
I don't think that's quite the case. I mean, my grandparents were, Depression era, and I agree they like the sweets, but I think it's a lot more the changes in the palate rather than being raised in that generation. In fact, if you think of being raised in the Depression, I remember my two older sisters were being babysat by my maternal grandmother when I think my parents must have been traveling or whatever it was. And my grandmother sent my sisters to school with mashed potato sandwiches. It's like, that is more of a post-Depression era kind of cultural thing, as opposed to just simply eating sweets, because they wouldn't have had sweets. I mean, sweets would have been much, much more of a treat to the Depression era individuals than they are now. I think they do favor sweets a little bit more, and so that's why they tend to have their candies out and things like that. And and part of it is wanting to please your grandchildren. And we get candies from our grandparents that we wouldn't get from our parents. So I don't think that is as much of it. I do think that that group of seniors is much, much older now. Many are beginning to pass on, and so kind of the next wave of seniors are the baby boomers. And we're the ones who grew up kind of in the space age era. And I remember as a kid, all the space age foods and processed foods. Suddenly processing was marketed as something really scientific and advanced and those types of things. And I think that's the generation that kind of got fed the bill of goods about processed foods and convenience. We got microwaves and we got, foods that were instant instead of having to be prepared. And so we got educated on those, and that process has just gotten worse over the decades, and the quality of food that is available is so much worse, and we're just kind of used to it. So I think that's a part of it as well.
Oh man, there's so many things I want to bring up right now. So do you think we're ever going to go back to a world where we could possibly have the time to prep? I just feel like we've become so accustomed to these instant dinners, or just really fast, because society now has just been go, 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 go. And it is kind of a luxury to have a home cooked meal.
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging. Well, it's not really a luxury. I think it is just a factor of dare I say, kind of laziness in our society. We have gotten used to convenience, and we have also filled our time with, not only are we filling our diets with junk, but we're filling our time and our activities with junk. We're not as active as we used to be. Again, we've talked about fewer than 23% of Americans are meeting the minimal physical activity guidelines. We're not eating good quality home prepared foods anymore. It's not like we don't have time for that stuff. Many people, and again, you can start looking at the socio-demographics and the effects that where you live, what kind of occupation you have, and your income might have on that. But for the most part, we have the time. We basically choose to do other things in that time rather than preparing food. We can, as a society, move back toward that if we so choose. But the reality is, it's not horribly difficult to prepare food ahead of time. It takes a little bit of planning. And if that is the challenge, then what can we do to access better quality foods for a more affordable price that maybe don't necessarily require us to spend a lot of time in food prep? And there are a lot of food prep services that are out there. Much of that has evolved from the bodybuilding fitness community, and it is possible for those companies to have a little bit more of a focused approach toward the elderly and consider, the cost that might be might be required there. And this is something, if you want to have government involvement in improving the health and quality of society, then this could be something that is supplemented by the federal government. I'm not a big government kind of person, but if I'm going to pay my taxes to help care for the elderly, I want them to get good quality stuff from it, and I don't want them just getting, food stamps that permit them to just simply get the most convenient, least nutritive foods that are available. I want them to get good quality foods that are based on the individual needs. And it really would not take much for us as a society to provide meals like that for individuals who don't have access.
Well, I do think that we're very slowly going into that direction. As far as the senior citizen community, I know it's not the best thing, but I do know they do have Meals on Wheels. I know there are certain meal preps businesses that are starting to pop up left and right. I don't know if we can name drop, but the only one I can think of one in particular that I live right by. And what's really cool about them is they do meal prep. And not only do they meal prep, they list the ingredients and how much each one is. So if you ever do decide, hey, you know what, I think I can make that on my own, that is another option. I know with me and my health insurance from work, I can log on to my little portal on my own personal webpage, and it does give options depending on what demographic or what category that you fit in to make those healthy life choices. And I actually discovered there is a meal prep option on things that you can eat weekly and things that are affordable. And I think as a society, I do think we're slowly getting back to the realm of, hey, we're recognizing the importance of a healthy, well-balanced diet. It is going to help you in the long run. And hopefully that can kind of eliminate the excuse of it's too expensive.
I think you're a little bit more optimistic than I am with the direction in which society is going, because the statistics aren't showing that. I mean, and I'm a numbers kind of person. I'm a science numbers. Reading this article, the progressive reduction in the quality of senior diets, which means as well that is carrying down into every other age group. And, and I look at, school meals that my kids are provided at school, they don't seem much better quality. If anything, they're probably worse than what we had when I was a kid back in the 60s and 70s. We're seeing college-age kids, they're not eating what they should be eating. And then it just progressively gets worse as we go up through the generations. And it just, if you're not eating a healthy diet in your 20s, you're not likely to eat a healthy diet in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s, and certainly not as you get into your 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so the trends are looking pretty disappointing over time. As we're looking at some of the other aspects of what's causing seniors to eat junkier diets, I think of, I will only go to a certain franchised fast food restaurant to use the restroom when I'm traveling. But when I've gone in there, usually it's like on the way to work in the morning or something like that, there's usually a lot of seniors in there eating the breakfast that they provide. And again, it's cheap. And I think for many of them, it creates a possibility for social interaction, although many times it's a single senior sitting there eating, really bad pancakes and other stuff. And so I'm not so sure it's getting better. We also need to kind of consider all the other factors that contribute to making it more difficult to acquire and prepare healthy foods. We have social isolation. So you have seniors who, if they are living at home, they might be living alone. They've lost their spouse, or they're widowed or widowers. They are maybe not interacting as well with their neighbors. We don't see social interaction between neighbors anymore. My wife has many times noted how we've seen a disappearance of the front porch in American suburbs. Nobody has a front porch anymore. Everybody's got their back deck where, they isolate themselves from others. There's fences up. Our community, everything is a fence around the backyard. And you don't have the communities like I grew up in where there was the front porch and you walk down the street and, retired people are sitting on their porch and they're waving and, talking and communicating with people walking by. And so we lose some of that social interaction. People are more lonely. When you're lonely, you tend to not eat as well as you would if you're, eating in a good social group. And so there are a lot of issues that really need to be considered when we're talking about seniors eating junkier diets.
Well, I think it's that social aspect that you talked about. I just kind of reminded me of my grandma before she passed, when she was living on her own. I don't necessarily know, it was before the dementia had set in, so I don't necessarily know if, she just didn't want to eat or didn't want to meal prep herself, or it was because of the early set of the dementia that she just would forget to eat altogether. And I think maybe a good way to get involved is we've talked about it in a previous podcast, the importance of social interaction and what that does to an individual's mental and emotional health. And maybe out there, if there are programs where an individual can kind of check in with our senior citizens and just say like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Hey, I wanted to sit down and have this meal with you, or hey, you want to come over, or you want to go on a picnic? Do you want to do whatever the case may be? I think just having that interaction or that friendly reminder, it's important to eat, because it's not just a junkier diet that's going to decrease the quality of life. It's also going to be malnutrition. If an individual forgets to eat altogether, then that's also going to play a factor in it.
Yeah, I don't know that it's forgetting to eat. I think it's just more of the ability to prepare that food, the desire to prepare that food, and also just the level of activity is going to diminish the amount of hunger that they might actually have. There was another study, improving nutrition to support healthy aging. What are some of the opportunities for intervention? And they talk about falling food consumption may put older adults at nutritional risk. They highlight the importance of nutrient-dense foods and overall quality of food for the older age groups to make sure that they're getting sufficient nutrition. And it becomes more and more challenging because of the preparation factors. They also tend to, because they're losing some of their taste capacities, food becomes a bit more monotonous, and so they have less desire to eat. And so a lot of it needs to kind of stem around that social interaction. And yes, I agree with you that as communities, as neighbors, we should be looking out more for the elderly in our communities, occasionally taking them to a meal, or inviting them for a meal. I think, in church communities, we could be much healthier in terms of having more of those social meals. I think, if someone goes to church, some of the older community churches, you find, that there's a lot more potlucks and things like that. And just the older women in particular get all excited about those, and, they put more effort into it, and it's much more of a social aspect. And our communities aren't quite structured that way anymore. And so we need to find ways to get that food, that social interaction, and the nutrients to the older population. And some of that depends on how are we planning for retirement. When we look at older adults who do not move into any kind of living communities, like communities that are like continuing care community, retirement communities, where there is socialization kind of built into their housing. They have dining halls or restaurant kind of things that they can go to. They have gyms that they participate in. When adults are not getting that social interaction and they're not getting as much visitation from their families and neighbors, then we see much more of a decline in those, the diets that those individuals are eating. And so planning for retirement, that's one thing to consider, is what kind of community are we moving into? What kind of nutrients and diets are they going to provide for our senior family members?
I think it's interesting you bring up like retirement homes or assisted livings or independent livings or whatever the case may be. When I used to be an activities director through a specific assisted living franchise, the number one complaint that we would get from the families placing their loved ones in there was actually the quality of food, because a lot of those individuals that were being placed in there, they had to have a specific type of dietary need, whether it be low sodium or something that didn't contradict the medication that they were on. It was really important for their loved ones to make sure that they were getting those dietary needs. Unfortunately, at this particular one, and it wasn't even that many residents. It was only 74 residents. The kitchen staff, what they had a schedule on what they were going to cook, and then that was it. They would just cook in mass quantities, and they used a lot of butter because it was cheap and available. And a lot of that food was, even though they claimed they never used salt, it was actually pretty salty. And I think that just had to do with the substitution. I think they were using like chicken. I always pronounce this word wrong. Bourlong, chicken bouillon, beef bouillon, whatever.
Bouillon?
Yes, thank you. That is filled with salt. That's filled with sodium. And you would see swelling in the senior citizens. You'd see that you would see the side effects from when they first moved in to after a few months. You could see that. Now, they were still coming and they were still gathering for these social events. But what a lot of people don't realize is they're like, man, there's so many social events. I do think that activities is a huge, huge factor when deciding if you're going to place a loved one into that home. But something that always gets overlooked is actually the nutrition portion. We have to eat to live. We have to eat to survive. So that should always be another determining factor, in my opinion, on placing a loved one into a home.
Yeah, and I think, there should be pressure put on these senior living communities. And there is pressure. I mean, if there were other economical options that were providing care for seniors that provided healthier food, they're going to attract the families that are going to be bringing in their seniors rather than just kind of whichever one is most affordable. They have that option to consider diet as well. And I think there needs to be ways of putting pressure on those communities to feed their people better. Fortunately, for many of us, we have better opportunity to be more selective and to move into more communities like CCRCs that are broader in the scope of the activities and the services that they provide for individuals. They provide more of a individualized dining selection, more like a restaurant, but with healthier portions and things like that. That's what you need to look for when you are finding a senior retirement community for yourself or for, a senior family member. And so careful choices need to be made. But again, if we are a society that is overall eating really crappy diets, we don't think to look at that as we go into a senior community because, well, of course, if we eat crappy food now, we're going to not notice that they're not feeding us crappy food when we go into those communities, or, we won't notice what they are feeding our family members. And, I think one of the biggest ways that we can counteract this American Seniors Eating Junkier Diets is get American teenagers, American college students, American professional aged individuals eating healthier foods. We change the dietary patterns early, those are going to carry on into our advanced years. If we are more physically active and can do more activities as we age, that's why I push weight training so much as exercise for seniors, because, we tend to think of one of the 6 basic movements that you should do in exercise as being loaded carries. Well, why do loaded carries? Because we do loaded carries all the time in life. We don't necessarily have to go to the gym to do loaded carries. If you're walking to the grocery store and you're carrying your bags of groceries home, those are weighted carries. Those are good activities. And the more you can do that, the more food you can bring home with yourself, the more you can walk to the grocery store instead of having to kind of pull up in a handicap spot and walk in and wheel your cart out to the spot and unload it and get back in your car and drive home. So changing our habits early are what we're going to help to counter this trend in the future. What do you think of that?
I think I couldn't agree more with you. I think it starts at a younger age, but that's why I'm so optimistic about the change with how society is going to go. I think this article, although it does show numbers that there is a decrease in health because senior citizens are eating junkier and junkier diets, I do think that next generation, that younger generation, is aware of it. And they're like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be placed in a home. I want to have my quality of life. I do think that's why there are options out there. I notice, just with me and people roughly around my age group, people are making dramatic lifestyle changes as far as their diet and what they're consuming. I do think that those stores that are popping up left and right about where they're having their own meal prep, I think it could be arguably a sign of laziness, but I also think it's showing awareness that, hey, it's important to have a nutrition plan. It's important to have that. I agree with you as far as starting younger to have weight training and resistance training. I think we do everything in life. We do those 6 main functions that we were talking about earlier in a previous podcast. We do almost all of those. yeah, I guess to answer your question on how I feel, I agree with you on that. I think it's important that we educate the younger one. I think knowledge is power. I think passing that wisdom and that guidance, and I think recognizing the older generation's warning signs on what's right around the corner for that younger generation can have a huge wake up call for them to make those lifestyle changes.
Yeah, I still think you're a little bit overly optimistic because it's just not backed up in, the data that are out there. And as we saw, obesity in the last 2 years just skyrocket in all populations, even young people.
Well, I mean, the last 2 years we've been in the middle of a pandemic, so people are home and shoving their faces full of comfort food.
True, but habits have been formed in those 2 years.
It's true.
That are much harder to break. And the reality is all it did was, I think, amplify many of the issues that were presently there. And we haven't addressed any of them. I'm still seeing very, very, very little conversation about the role of diet, obesity, and inactivity in this previous, present pandemic, however you want to look at it. I'm not sure where we're at with it all. But I think there needs to be much more societal change. Kind of going back to some of those changes that were more noticeable. It's interesting that it's non-Hispanic white older adults that have the biggest drop in diet quality. There's something more going on in there because we would probably be able to say that there's a greater number of non-Hispanic white older adults that are on generally better financial means, and they're not eating as well. So there's more changes than just simply socioeconomic status. We do know older adults with lower income levels and lower education levels are going to be consistently poorer, but they're getting worse. They're not getting better. And so when we look at this big picture, I think we're seeing that across the board, society-wise, we are moving toward junkier diets. And even those who are better educated and in better socioeconomic statuses are still eating poorer diets. And so much needs to be changed there. The researchers also noted that in the past 20 years, food insecurity is estimated to have more than doubled in the U.S. And I have some issues when we talk food insecurity because sometimes I think it's a way of how it's measured. I know there was a study at my institution a number of years ago by some of my colleagues that looked at a rather small sample of our college students and found that I think it was 60% had food insecurities. And as I read that, I was like, well, when I was in college, that was called being a college student. So some of our expectations have changed a little bit. But there's also, it is still very much a real scenario. And part of that is stemming from, again, the access to quality food. We have more and more big box grocery stores opening up and fewer of these more local community mom and pop types of grocery stores. And so people aren't walking to go to the grocery store. They're tending to go into these mega stores, once a week or so and doing their big shopping, or they go to, your Costco's, Sam's Club kind of places and buying in bulk. But what are they buying in bulk? Are they buying quality food in bulk, or are they buying, crap food in bulk?
They're probably buying food that tastes good. They're probably buying food, just kind of playing off of what you said with the whole pandemic, how it intensified underlying issues. It probably some people were like, well, I don't like to drink or I don't like to do drugs, but I do like to have a great dopamine hit and I get that pleasure from eating sweets and food, and I'm addicted to the sugar. And you know what? It makes me feel good. I'm going to eat this ice cream because it makes me feel good. I'm going to eat this Ho-Ho or this Twinkie or an entire sleeve of Thin Mint Girl Scout cookies because it makes me feel good and it's delicious.
You've actually had that conversation with people where they emphasize that they get a dopamine spike from eating that crappy food. And
no one recognizing it. No one does that. But a lot of people will probably say like, I know it's bad for me, but I don't care. It's tasty. It's so good. Like people say that all the time. Would you rather eat a delicious, big, juicy cheeseburger, or would you like chicken breast and broccoli? Out of the two of those, your body naturally wants to crave that burger because it's so full of flavor. Mentally, you should be taking on that chicken broccoli because you know the benefits of it and you know how healthy it is. But if you had to choose, and if there were no consequences out of the two of them, good majority of people are going to take that burger.
Well, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that burger. It's where is that burger being purchased and how is it being made? And there's a big difference between, a homemade hamburger that is made from good, lean, quality ground beef versus one that is purchased at a fast food restaurant that has been frozen, has a bunch of fillers in it, bunch of preservatives, and the cheese that is put on can barely be called cheese because if you left it outside for decades it would not even melt or change. There's a big difference between the quality of fast food. I mean, you can say, well, I go to such and such fast food place and I get the chicken because it's healthier. Well, it's not really healthy.
No.
And so it's not a matter of the type of food that we eat. In many cases, as we talk about what affects our weight management the most, 50% of that's going to be calories in versus calories out. And so that burger made at home can have far fewer calories than a burger that is made at a fast food place that has a bunch of additives and things like that in it, that is also priced so cheaply that we can eat two of them and we think we're getting a bargain because, it's 2 for 1. I save money if I buy two. And so we need to consider that as well. But, if that were the case, if cheap food and, cheap accessible food countered food insecurity, then we'd be set because there's a fast food place on just about every corner and it's really easy to access this really crappy food. But if we look at food insecurity as access to quality, nutritive foods, we're in a tough place because, you go to a grocery store, they are designed to get you walking through and buying the cheap processed kind of foods. It's more inconvenient to go into the areas where you're going to get the good quality fresh foods. And it's much more difficult to get to grocery stores because they are further away from our communities. And if you live in, urban areas or rural areas, you're probably less likely to have access to good quality food. If you live in the suburbs, generally, it's a money issue and you have a car, you can get to a grocery store, you can get to a Sam's Club, Costco, whatever it is. And if you know what to buy, you can get the right food. But there needs to be better education. I think, that begins with K through 12. It begins with, college dining halls, maybe offering better choices to students. And it depends on, the U.S. government, even as we look at things like, what foods we should be eating, making it more clear to individuals what is good, healthy food and what is not, and not be kind of subsidizing the fast food, crap food industries. We should make it harder for people to be able to produce and to sell. I'm going to put this into a,
parental advisory.
Yeah,
explicit,
parental advisory when I say
explicit
shitty
content.
food, because that's basically what it is. I mean, calling it crappy is just giving it too much credit. So what other thoughts do you have?
I just kind of agree with you. I think that it does start with K through 12. I think I personally I would disagree as far as the college age. I think we should prep them prior to college. I think
what I said, K through 12.
Right. But in college, offering those healthier items, it should be a no-brainer. I feel like if individuals are paying as much as they do to go to college, I think part of that payment is also going to include the healthier options for food. I do remember just in the cafeteria at Western, the only thing really I remember as far as health-wise, there was a poster and it was about portion control. So it was literally a picture of burger and fries and a drink, and then to the right of it was that burger cut in half, the fries dropped down to only a quarter of the portion, and the drink was a smaller one, and it says portion control. It's like, well, yeah, that's calories in, calories out, but it's not so much about the quantity of the food, but more of the quality. And I do think it starts with K through 12. I think what we give kids in the cafeteria, and I realize a lot of schools throughout the entire country struggle with school budgets and stuff like that. But I do think that, you know, if we look at nutrition as a form of fuel, we are fueling that next generation, right? We are helping that next generation of children not only be as active, but have brain food and they learn to love a healthy, well-balanced meal versus, all right, we got chicken strip day filled with preservatives and sodium. I love it. Chicken fried steak and those little Smucker's peanut butter and jelly Uncrustables, which are delicious, but...
Oh, don't tell me you eat those Uncrustables. I mean, again, processed food. Why in the hell does anybody need to get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich from the store that has already been made and the crust cut off and kind of crimped along the edge? You can't buy a loaf of bread, some peanut butter, and some jelly and make your own damn sandwich in the same amount of time.
I'm not saying me. I'm just saying that's what they offer in schools now.
Well, and that's a big issue. They shouldn't
it's
be
a huge
offering
issue.
that kind of stuff. And when it comes to what kids learn in school, if it's not reinforced at home, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can teach a child what is healthy food in third grade, and then they come home and mom and dad have just bought Doritos and, you know, send out for pizza for dinner, and, you know, you want a drink, they pour you a big glass of sugared pop, and that's all they're buying. What are the choice you have? I mean, it's not like you can say, Mom, let me do the grocery shop, and I'm going to go to Whole Foods and buy some good quality food because that's what I'm learning in health class or wellness class. You know, they learn this stuff, but then they go home and it's reinforced by their family, or it's not reinforced by their families. So the education has to be expanded beyond just K through 12. You know, we're maybe overly optimistic that, okay, well, once these kids turn 18 and they get out of the household, they're going to remember everything that they learned in elementary school health class, and then they're going to suddenly start buying good, healthy food. I think that's a little bit naive. I think we need to be reinforcing it throughout. We need to be making it more likely for families to be accessing healthy foods as opposed to unhealthy foods. And we can do that. You know, we have a lot of good social support systems for people with economic challenges. But when you look at those systems, they are not built to encourage people to buy healthy foods. They're encouraging them to, you know, essentially go to the store with coupons that are going to be spread out over buying more crap food because they can get more for their money out of that. What we need to be looking at is how can we give food to people who are in need that is going to be good quality food that is less expensive and is going to go further and be healthy.
Well, I am currently I'm trying to find property, trying to find a house. scoping out all these neighborhoods. And one thing I am noticing, which maybe it's been around forever, but I've never really paid attention or I've never noticed it before. I'm seeing a lot of community gardens being really, really popular. They're popping up left and right. I'm seeing, and if I never noticed them before, it's probably because no one was in there. I'm seeing more and more people taking advantage of these community gardens, growing fruits and vegetables, and then picking it. That might be another option. I do think it's really weird how rural areas don't necessarily have access to the best food. Because when I think rural, I think more of like farm or agricultural. And I feel like farm fresh eggs, grass-fed meat, like I picture that in those farming communities. I do think that's kind of a paradox that they don't have access to.
Well, and it's a sad state of our society.
Mm-hmm.
We have individuals who are doing the bulk of the work on these mega farms because, again, the family farm is really been pushed down by corporations. And, the smaller farms, you're generally farming by yourself or, hiring a few people within the community. You have farm stands and those types of things. You don't see as many farm stands as you drive through rural areas anymore because all of that food is going off to centers that are going to basically box it up and ship it off to grocery stores. And so the people that are doing all that picking, I remember an article a number of years ago talking about it. I think it was, I want to say Fresno, California, is one of the greatest food deserts in this country. But it's also one of the greatest producers of food in the country. And the problem is that the people who are farming that, they have to go to the grocery store to access the food that they're actually buying, and it's too expensive and it's not as readily available to them. We're shipping all this food out from the areas where it's grown, and the people that are actually in those communities and producing it have less access to it. And that's just, to me, is ridiculous. And I don't know how to change that, but it is a major problem.
We can change it just by throwing out an idea on whether that'll happen or not, but have the farmers get a keep like 10% of their own profit, or not profit, 10% of their own crop to divvy out throughout the community. That's just an idea. It's not going to solve everything, but
again, these are mega farms. These are corporate farms. These are not, the farm that my uncle and aunt had in Zealand, Opal, Pennsylvania, where they had Moyer Dairy for years. And, I remember as a kid, when the big dairies were coming in, my cousin Brian had to ride literally shotgun. I mean, not just shotgun, hey, we call out shotgun when we get in the car so we can sit in the passenger seat. Literally riding with a shotgun in the passenger seat on the dairy truck as my Uncle Lloyd was making his deliveries, because they were being tempted to be run out by these bigger dairies. And so, we tend to think, corporate America is so great that it is providing us with more food. Well, it's not providing food to the communities that most need it. It's providing foods to a broader community that have the money to pay for it. And, when we are accessing food in that way, the quality goes down as well. It's like, when you buy food now that's coming from South America or, Mexico or, other areas of the country, Florida oranges throughout the year, well, those foods, first of all, they have certain seasons. And so if you can access foods out of season, there's something wrong with that food, or there's something been added to the food that's going to make it a little bit less healthy. And it's just not the way we should be approaching getting our foods. We want to be eating a little bit more local, eating, a bit more in-season types of foods, and we're going to get the most nutrient type of foods that we have access to. And again, these are bigger problems, and we're going to actually solve on this page. But, I think given the circumstances that we have in our society, we can still make better choices. And the challenge is that we're not getting individuals to make those right choices. I mean, the numbers are not showing that. You might see it in smaller communities, and Portland's weird. So they're going to be having more of those tendencies to these community gardens and stuff like that because, we have, the organic crowds and that kind of stuff, and buy local. And I was just preaching buy local, but, in communities like that, you're going to be more likely to see those. But as you move away from those, you're not going to have as much access to those. And, when we look at other corners of America, these problems are much more magnified. And we need to, as communities, as societies, as governments, to be dealing with these major issues. And I think we tend to ignore them from a government standpoint. We tend to throw money at things, but the money doesn't actually trickle down to where it needs to be. But as educators, I think as well, we need to do our job in terms of educating people in what is healthy and what is unhealthy. And I'm hoping that's part of what this podcast will do, is that, we can begin to get people thinking about what can we do in our community, what can I do in my own life to get better quality food. Kind of back to the argument that the researchers in that JAMA article highlighted, that healthier diets cost more than unhealthy diets. I think that is total BS. There's a certain level of truth to that, but it's like, how are we defining healthy diet? I think if we really look at it and are more conservative in what we are buying and the choices that we are making and what we expect, that it can be done a lot cheaper. When you buy in bulk, you're not buying processed food in bulk. You're buying more raw foods in bulk. You're buying whole foods in bulk. You're buying things more in season, going to a farmer's market. And that takes time and effort. But also another thing that we can consider is how we buy food. When we have these big mega stores, we do tend to buy in greater quantity, and we tend to throw away a lot more. Well, and also, what do we do with those foods that are thrown away? What do we do with the foods that don't look quite as pretty as they come off the tree or out of the ground? A lot of those foods get tossed away. We can find ways, and we must find ways, to reduce the cost of foods. For those who cannot afford healthier foods, then that's where our communities step in to help those individuals to have access to healthier foods, not just simply food.
But I think there are. I do think that I'm agreeing with you. I think we do need that, but I also think that there are other individuals that are out there that also agree with that. I know there actually is a webpage. I think it's called like Ugly Foods or something like that. My mom started ordering from them. It's a lot cheaper than going to the grocery store. They actually deliver the food to your house, and I don't recall the name, but I do know it's got something that has to do with ugly, and the fruit and the vegetables, they look absolutely ugly because they're not the perfectly round or perfectly shaped or that you see in the grocery store. These are the ones that, they fell off the ugly wagon, but you know what? They still taste the same. They still have the same nutritional value, and they're significantly cheaper. And what a convenience it is to go online, order whatever fruits, vegetables, whatever it is that you need, and then it gets delivered to your house. I do think the social aspect of that, I think we've talked about the importance of that. I do think, especially in the realm of senior citizens, having that social aspect. Here you go, Mr. Armstrong. We're dropping off your food for you. Would you like us to stick around, help you make a meal? We brought a little meal prep. Now,
Do you think they actually do that? I mean,
No, they don't
there's
do
no
that.
businesses that do that. And
No,
in fact, we have contactless delivery now because of COVID.
You're absolutely
it's
correct.
Even less interaction.
But it's just one step that we could do. I thought we were laying ideas on the table on how to change
Well, no,
this.
I think you're right. But the reality is, those exist. But are they accessing the people who most need them? And I don't think they necessarily are focused as much on accessing the people who are in need as much as, okay, well, here's a business model where I can profit from.
Right. Well, that's also where it's going to come down to education through the K through 12, and then get that constant education, whether they're supported at home or not, just that constant education every day. I guarantee. Now, I'm not a dad yet. I don't have kids, but if I did, and I was making poor, unhealthy choices as far as the diet realm, and I had a kid come home every single day, and they're like, "Dad, you shouldn't be eating that. Dad, we learned in school about this and this and this. Dad, broccoli is really beneficial." And well, eventually I'm going to be like, dang, you know what? They're right. I needed to start taking. But because of the education with that kid, eventually that kid's going to turn into a teenager or a college kid. And maybe they just so happen to be listening to this podcast. And they're like, wow, those two gentlemen are absolutely right. I need to make a more of an effort to have a social meal with my grandma or my grandpa, and I need to make sure that they are eating healthier. The science is there. The statistics are proving that there is a decline. That could be one change that I can make in order to help. I don't know, just an idea, just a thought.
Okay, I still think you're a bit optimistic in terms of these kids coming home and changing their parents' habits, but. There are other things that I think need to be made accessible to seniors, or the seniors need to understand that these are available to them.
Right.
You mentioned the ugly foods. Many people might not even know that those are available. And again, going back to behavioral change, you have the, stages of change. You have pre-contemplation, contemplation, and so on. And so in many cases, people are pretty much in that pre-contemplation stage. They don't even know that these services are available. That's the responsibility of educators, of politicians, of community leaders to recognize this, to make it, to educate people as to these are available, but to make those services available in a way that people can actually access them. I think one thing that's come out of COVID is, we've seen a lot more people taking advantage of grocery delivery. More of these grocery stores are, making it possible to deliver groceries to seniors. But again, the seniors have to take advantage of that. There has to be a certain level of, computer competency to be able to do that. But there's more that the stores can do. They could, have programs specific to the elderly, and have kind of bit of an outreach. If someone doesn't, send in their weekly grocery order, hey, haven't gotten your order this week. Is everything okay? How are things going? Having a bit of a check-in. There are things that we can do. Again, there's the meal prep services, I think, are a great thing for families who are maybe caring for or have care for their senior parents or grandparents or whatever. To actually, it's a great gift. My wife and I gifted my mother before she passed one of the food delivery services. And, so we sent meals to her. We were able to get kind of meals that she liked, and she appreciated those. She put them in her freezer. But you still have to follow up with the seniors as well to make sure they're actually even eating those.
Right.
We talked to my mom, and she'd, I ate half of it, and I'm saving the other half for later. It's like, those are supposed to be, single meals. You're supposed to be eating the whole thing. And so, we can still see falling food consumption in seniors, even if we are providing accessible quality food for them. And so we need to also consider that they need to be getting more of the foods that they need. They have to have access to it. It's kind of one issue with Meals on Wheels is that it is only one meal, and I understand it's a community-based program that is just trying to get at least one quality meal to seniors, and they get some interaction, but it's not often enough, and it may be that only meal that person gets. And even in schools, oftentimes the school lunches and sometimes even breakfast that they provide are the only quality meals that kids might get. Even though they're learning this stuff in school, they go home, parents might have the best intentions, but they can't afford it. And so we have to consider all of these factors that are contributing to why seniors and why our communities as a whole are eating junkier diets. And it's more than just the seniors. I do think we're seeing trends across the age groups, and what's going to counter those trends? I don't know exactly. I think, in my own opinion, I would banish most of the fast food restaurants, limit the number of those going up. Perhaps we need to have rules in place that, for every so many fast food places, there has to be a grocery store in that proximity, so that people can actually get quality food. There need to be healthier choices. I do like the idea of more meal prep kind of communities. Many things like that we need to do. It's a huge problem, and I don't know that we've solved anything on today's podcast, but I think it is helpful to bring awareness to the fact that the elderly are not eating as well as they should. We as caregivers should be cognizant of that and be aware of what are our parents, our grandparents eating, or individuals that are under our care. If we are operating senior retirement communities, what can we do to provide better access to healthier foods for these individuals, and do it at a healthier cost, so that it's not raising the cost of living in these communities to provide healthier food. And then, above all else, is how do we engage in the aging population socially in order to make the food experience much, much better?
Are you asking my opinion, or are you just...
Well, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I can think of would just be, again, just capitalizing on the subject of education. I think starting at a young age, not only educating them in the cafeteria or the importance of food, I do think that putting a school program in place of a generational outreach program where, I don't know, maybe once a year, elementary school kids or middle school kids can actually walk on over to an assisted living or an independent living and have a meal with a senior, and they share stories, just kind of building that would make any senior's day. And I think it's a really cool experience for the kids. I also think that part of an outreach program, I do know that a lot of senior citizens, once they get closer to a certain age, they start getting those letters in the mail. I believe it's through AARP. Just something that's, hey, have you considered your death insurance? Have you considered funeral services? I think something like an outreach program of, a little postcard in the mail saying like Friends for Food or something like that. And then they can call and they can sign up. That way, they've already gotten a postcard. They know it's a real, legit business. No one's going to steal their information. That way, if they don't have access to the internet or they're not computer savvy, they at least have someone that can call them weekly or bi-weekly and say, hey, how's it going? Just checking in. You haven't ordered anything. Would you like us to order some groceries? It looks like last time in our system you ordered a big head of broccoli. Do you want us to still do that? We have a special going on today. Something to that effect. So there's some form of constant We have healthier options. We're in your corner. We're educating that younger group of people. We're showing them the importance of what it is to eat healthier. We're creating a environment where it's bringing seniors to that social event. I don't know. I think that would be something on that. And that's all I have to say. That's it.
All right. Well, kind of in conclusion, I think, we still have a lot more to discuss in regards to nutrition for healthy aging. And I think that'll be a topic that will come back repeatedly as we look more and more into the dietary patterns and the quality of life of older adults, how we can counter the poor eating habits of the senior citizens and our individuals across all the ages, and really kind of work to change the trends in eating, not only for the seniors, but also for those who are soon to become seniors as we, age well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.